Our final speaker is Riaz Bhunnoo. Riaz is the director of the Global Food Security Programme at UKRI. Riaz provides strategic leadership to the Global Food Security Programme and drives forward cross-stakeholder interdisciplinary activities in partnership with the UK public funders of food security research. Riaz has worked at BBSRC since 2005, and in that time has undertaken secondments to Research Council UK Executive Directorate to work on cross-council research coordination and policy, and the Gates Foundation to work on the Grand Challenge explorations. So very much comes right back to what we were talking about just at the start. The purpose of this event tonight is very much to kind of look at cross-disciplinary issues within the biological sciences. So over to you, Riaz.
Well, thanks very much for the kind introduction, Simon, and thank you for the invitation to present to you tonight. So I'm Riaz Bhunnoo, I'm Director of the Global Food Security Programme. We have a number of government departments on our programme, so just to be clear, my views tonight are my own, and I'm not representing them tonight. But I just wanted to explain a bit about what we do in the programme before I kick on. So we bring together the major UK public sector funders of food security research. So that is UKRI, UK Research and Innovation, the government departments and the devolved administrations. And it's hosted by BBSRC, which is the major funder of food-related research and funds some excellent bioscience. So two main roles, coordination and collaboration. So collectively across the partners, we spend about £350 million a year on research and innovation. So it makes sense to coordinate that. And the partners cover different disciplines and different parts of the food system. So we identify where we can work together at an interdisciplinary and food systems level. So that's the type of view we take. And I would say our activities lead to three broad outcomes. So we try and raise the profile of the food security challenge, so it's high on the government and business agenda, translate knowledge into policy and practice, and in particular try and synthesize knowledge across different disciplines. And we also try and influence the research agenda and research funding. We think about the food system in GFS, which is everything from food production through to processing, manufacturing, transportation, to consumption and impacts on health. A system is simply a set of things working together as part of an interconnected whole. And we frame issues in this way because the food system is highly interconnected, and it avoids unintended consequences from interventions in one part of the system adversely affecting another. So as an example, simply growing more vegetables to improve health that then people don't want to eat and then end up perishing. It also encourages interdisciplinarity, I should say, and holistic solutions that are closer to real world policy making. We published an article in The Lancet on how this approach can be applied in policy making across governments and businesses alongside those. So on to some of the big challenges. So diets are changing as incomes grow, and it's that combined with population growth that will cause some of the challenges. Economic development is a good thing. The rich people tend to not only eat more, as shown in the graph on the right, but also more meat and dairy, as shown in the graph on the left. Which can be resource intensive and have high environmental impacts and potential health implications. The graph shows how much meat is recommended for health, which is the red line, and what we're actually eating. So around 3 times as much in the US and about twice as much as we need for health in Europe. And this matters because livestock are the biggest land users in the world, and Tamsin's highlighted the 85% of farmland figure for meat, dairy and eggs, and they only provide a third of our calories. But also a third of, the world's crops are fed to animals. They use a third of all available fresh water and emit just under 15% of all GHG emissions. However, they're also a way of turning land not suitable for crops into food. They've shaped the appearance of our countryside. They can have ecological benefits, such as increasing biodiversity and soil quality when using crop rotation. They provide a readily available source of nutrients for certain demographic groups. So not all bad. And I think the focus here is really just consuming slightly less. If consumption goes down, that frees up land in terms of both the land that the livestock's reared on and the feed, the land for producing their feed, which can then be used for other things, whether that is for growing crops for human consumption or for nature. So in the next 40 years, the world will demand more food than we've ever produced in human history. And that's if diets continue as they currently are. But there are two major externalities that are not captured by the market that we have to acknowledge. That's the impact on health and the impact on the environment. So 1 in 3 people globally suffer from some form of malnutrition, whether hunger, micronutrient deficiency, or overweight and obesity. This study in The Lancet involved over 200 countries and 19 million participants, and it indicated that globally there are now more people who are overweight and obese than underweight. And the two combined account for just over half of the world population, so a new normal. Worryingly, all the lines in the graphs are going down, with the proportions at the top increasing, suggesting this trend towards overweight and obesity may well continue over time. And there's an estimation in the slide of the economic cost of non-communicable disease. On the environmental side, planetary boundaries are being breached, as shown in the map on the left. If we were to respect planetary boundaries, and those are limits in terms of how far you can push the environment in terms of water, biodiversity, whatever it may be. If we were to respect those boundaries, but leave production and consumption unchanged from what it is currently, we could only feed 3.4 billion people. However, if we optimize land and resources to grow food for healthy diets and reduce food waste, then we could feed over 10 billion people. This underlines the need for me to think about both production and demand side changes. It's worth noting, though, some of the key assumptions here. So food is distributed equally through global trade, food loss and waste are halved, a quarter of our protein comes from animal sources, all very significant challenges. It also doesn't account for land that we might well need for bioenergy, carbon capture and storage to meet the Paris Agreement. So land use is a really, really hot topic. So average climate change will affect what we can grow and where, but there are two further challenges. So climate change will likely reduce the nutritional content of crops, and this will likely affect the global south the most. But can't we just eat more to compensate? Well, no, because of losses to pests and diseases. This science article showed that an insect's individual metabolic rate and the insect as a whole population growth rate both increase with temperature, meaning there are more insects and they eat more, so greater losses. The biggest producers of wheat and maize are circled in the graphs, with France, the US and China suffering the biggest losses, so these impacts are worldwide. But it's the variability that makes up the average temperature and rainfall that will produce the shocks. So that will be heat waves and cold snaps and droughts and floods. And our own analysis suggests that the risk of extreme weather hitting several major food producing regions of the world at the same time could triple by 2040. And climatic shocks don't just lead to a substantive yield loss on farm. The impacts are channeled downstream via market and policy responses. For example, an export ban, and that leads to food price spikes. And as shown in the graph, there is some evidence linking food price volatility and social unrest. The red lines here are food riots, and you can see how they change with changes in food price. The blue line on the graph is the point at which the authors submitted their report to the US government, warning about this link, and you can see what happened immediately afterwards in terms of the red lines. In terms of resilience, diets are becoming increasingly similar over time, and this is shown in the top left graph, which is a statistical map of country diets, and essentially the dots getting closer together from red, blue to black through time shows you that those diets are getting more similar. According to the FAO, just 9 crop plants out of 6,000 account for 2/3 of global crop production, with the rest of these species in decline. 1 in 4 species is now at risk of extinction, with land use change for food production a major factor. The world map on the bottom left shows where we produce the bulk of the world's calories in a very small number of areas, those areas in red. If a shock occurs at any of those points, it would cause a substantive yield loss that would then impact a whole load of different countries around. And this growing homogenization, diets getting similar, is due to comparative advantage. So in a stable world, it makes sense for a country to grow what's best suited to its local environment, export the excess at competitive advantage, and then import what they can't grow themselves. And that, along with subsidies, drive to scale and concentration of production. So some areas become bread baskets for the rest of the world, and this then leads to efficiencies and lower food prices. However, this comes with risks. The uniformity and lack of genetic diversity of large-scale agriculture reduces resilience to pests and diseases and extreme weather. It also reduces biodiversity because these crops are normally grown in monoculture, and that has implications. It also has implications for health because the less diverse a diet is, the less nutrition you get from it. So multiple avenues there for impacts. This slide for me explains why we need to think about the whole food system. On the left is what we should be eating for health, and on the right is what we are actually producing. These charts imply that our food system is not producing the right things for health. Globally, more grains, sugars, and fats are produced than needed for healthy diets, but not enough fruits and vegetables. And these grains, sugars, and fats are highly subsidized. And when refined and combined in manufacturing and promoted via marketing, lead to cheap and unhealthy products that permeate our food environments, resulting in overconsumption, poor nutrition, and health. So I think on the bill, I said I'd talk about the scenarios report that we produced. So I'll just say a quick bit about that and move on to some of the research. So we just published a paper in Nature Food looking at different scenarios for meeting the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, focused around whether we target climate mitigation on its own or wider sustainability goals, and whether we look at the food system becoming more localized or more globalized. And I don't have time to go through all the scenarios. Please do read the paper. But across them all, this is analysis across all 4 scenarios that we produced. You can see that food waste and meat consumption go down in all of them, and climate resilience goes up. But it's a mixed picture on biodiversity and land use, and also in terms of wealth and health and social aspects. There were some broader messages that emerged as well around focusing on wider metrics of sustainability alongside climate mitigation, because if you focus just on emissions, you get negative impacts on biodiversity. There were some things around the development and implementation of systems approaches and systemic technologies, and also a huge recognition that a lot depends on how reliant we are on trade in the future. But overall, there's no one scenario with all-round benefits. And society has to determine what it wants to prioritize in the future to enable us to meet those goals, meet those global agreements. And I mean, there's no single pathway. And the reason we did this analysis was to try and help policymakers think through how it would pan out up to 2050 if we put in place a set of policies and just see how they play out. And scenario development is quite an important tool for that. So in my program, in GFS program, we developed a £14.5 million interdisciplinary research program on food system resilience. And this includes projects that look at fruit and veg, pig farming, phosphorus, dairy farming, pollination, urban agriculture, just to name a few. And that program is currently in place and is still going. So please do look at the website if you're interested in some of those projects. COVID-19 was a demand shock in that the service sector was shut down and demand switched to retail overnight, leading to empty shelves alongside panic buying. What we need to consider is, was this the latest in a series of shocks to hit the food system, noting the recent shortages of HGV drivers and CO2? And what is the next big shock likely to be? A climate-related food production shock would test the system in a very different way. So there's a question for future research around how do we build back a better and more resilient food system that can withstand the shocks coming down the road? Is the just-in-time food system fit for purpose? You know, it's highly efficient, but is it resilient? How do we build slack into the system? You know, for example, food storage. And how do we diversify both in terms of food production and supply? And I guess the most important question at the end of that is who pays? Because if you move away from efficiency, generally costs go up. And I wanted to finally just end on one of our research programs that's currently in the process of being awarded. So I've mentioned, you know, UKRI funds world-class research, and I've mentioned the biosciences, but we also fund world-class environmental science, social science, and economics. And in the GFS program, we bring all of these valuable perspectives together. And we recently developed a new £47.5 million interdisciplinary research program on transforming the UK food system for healthy people and a healthy environment. And the big question we want to address is this: if we put healthy people and a healthy environment at the heart of our food system, what would we eat? How would we encourage people to eat it? And where would that food come from? So what would we need to grow and manufacture in the UK? And what would we need to import? And then what interventions across business and government and civil society would deliver this transformed food system in practice? So the programme brings together researchers from different disciplines, government, business and civil society, to co-produce research. And this includes research teams working with stakeholders to actually trial interventions within the lifetime of the grants. We were keen not to end up with a bunch of academic research papers, but for the researchers to actually oversee an intervention happening within the lifetime of their grants, and hopefully getting important data from that. And also piloting things that could then take off afterwards. What's needed is simultaneous and collective action across the food system, and we've set up the grants to facilitate this from the outset. And you can read more about it in our Nature paper. So the first call focused on large consortia, up to £6 million each, involving multiple disciplines and stakeholders. As would be expected, they cover a wide range of things. For example, increasing consumption of fruit and vegetables and fibre, less and better meat, a mixture of national and regional approaches, and different demographic groups, for example, young people or those from low socioeconomic backgrounds. So you can find out more on the website. And finally, just to highlight that we've also, as part of this, funded a new £5 million centre for doctoral training. And the purpose of that is to develop the next generation of food system thinkers, people who can really consider the whole system right from farm to fork, and the interdependencies and the trade-offs within that. And we want this cohort of students to be able to work across disciplines and sectors, leading on food systems thinking in whichever organisation they end up working in, and driving the change that is needed. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much indeed, Riaz. And I mean, again, you've just raised, a number of really interesting points there, just right at the very end, that kind of transdisciplinary element, within the research field, within academia, we tend to find ourselves siloed in kind of one little area, and actually that ability to reach out and cross, not every single project needs to have a little bit of social science and a bit of diagnostics and a bit of whatever else in it, but there is that, that need for us to reach out and best use the science that we have